Good morning, or good afternoon, I guess. We all had lunch already. It's been great to be in this venue, learn from all of you, as well as our wonderful speakers. And so as Martin said, my name's Mosavat, and I work at the product team at Slack. But today, I want to talk about something from my past experience, well before Slack, and hopefully inspire you to think about your role as product leaders in a different way. So let's start with every PM's favorite question. What problem are we trying to solve? Over the last 20 years, I've seen an explosion in complexity and the quality for the digital products that we're building. The expectations for customers are rising. Just look at the difference between the first version of Facebook and what counts as a minimum viable first release for stories today. It's not enough to just solve problems for customers. We have to solve it elegantly. We have to solve them beautifully. We have to solve them intelligently, and all in crowded and very, very competitive markets. And the result is an explosion in the complexity on our teams. Think about all the people, the pieces that are in the equation today. We just heard from someone about research. That was a role that didn't even exist 7 or 8 years ago when I first started in product. Data science, analytics, engineering, front-end engineering, back-end engineering, machine learning engineers, new frameworks, complex business models, all that we've heard about today. And you add into that like growth and different methodologies around design sprints and experimentation. Honestly, it's incredible that we are able to build anything at all. Luckily, we have so much history of management to sort of build on top of, right? And in the Industrial Revolution, there were people like Daniel McCallum, who was the general manager and the president of the New York and Erie Railroad, who invented modern management. Like, imagine that. Imagine a world where there was no such concept as management because it didn't need to exist. He created the first org chart. This is a beautiful illustration of the first ever known org chart of that railroad. And because no one had needed management before, the Industrial Revolution sort of created new problems. And I think this change in digital products is also creating a new change for us. But lucky for us, he wrote down these principles of management. I don't expect you to read all these, and I'm not going to read them to you. But look at the words that are highlighted, the words he uses. Things like power, faithful, embarrass, subordinates, delinquent. These principles were designed for environments with more well-known inputs, more well-known outputs, things like factories and railroads. And also, I think the important thing to note is that these things were designed for a time when people accepted these kinds of rigid hierarchies, not just at work, but also inside their homes. But we still are trying to manage creative discovery and product development processes with a lot of these same mechanisms, right? We hear about them: weekly reports, dashboards, metrics, OKRs, measurements of velocity, agile, et cetera, things that are designed to increase predictability, to give us more and more predictability about what's going to happen when, and to control the process. But think back to all these different people. What's different about them? You don't pay Silicon Valley designers, Harvard MBAs, PhD data scientists, or 10x engineers, as they like to be called, massive salaries just to do what they're told and pull tickets off of backlogs. So what do we do instead? How can we keep hundreds of creative, smart people, each of which have their different skills and backgrounds and expertise, focused and aligned on a common goal? And where does the product manager fit in all of this, right? The idea of being a generalist is knowing more about all these different pieces and figuring out what to do is basically impossible because no one can be an expert in 2 of these things, never mind all of them. So how do we coordinate individual creativity to build incredible products and features year after year as these markets get harder and harder to break into? So I don't think that management is the solution. I think it's unfortunate that we put the word in our title. My claim is that creative, multidisciplinary, and highly uncertain work cannot just be managed. And luckily, I know a better way. Because before I started working in startups, I saw it done differently. I asked Martin to leave a certain part out of my bio, which is that my first job out of college was at Pixar Animation Studios. And before I'd ever heard the words product manager spoken, even before I knew what those words were, I got to be on the teams that created Finding Nemo, Cars, WALL-E, and Up. Brief pause. Ed wrote a book about this, Ed Catmull, president and founder of Pixar. It's called Creativity, Inc., and it explains everything about how Pixar works in excruciating detail. It's an amazing book. It actually speaks to my experience there as just a lowly random engineer on these products really, really well. I don't know a lot about how the inner workings of those executive teams operated. This isn't a summary of the book. That's not what I'm here to talk about. Instead, I want to talk about 3 lessons that I learned there that I've held with me through every single role that I've had since. The 3 lessons that I believe have most impacted how I've built and run product teams over the past 10 years across all different kinds of companies. I've had the pleasure of working on consumer products, B2B products like Slack, fitness, marketplaces, games, and in film. But a couple of things are always in common, especially when you're trying to bring creative people together to do amazing work. So I think these are the 3 fundamental and often forgotten roles of great product leaders today. I learned them from film directors. I didn't know it at the time, but it turns out the role of a film director, an animation director, is a lot like a great product manager. No one reports to them. They don't control any budget, the producer does. And they don't do any of the, what you would call actual work. But they're ultimately responsible for the final product, right? And they do this in these 3 ways. Number 1, they tell us a great story that your team can remember and can rally behind. Number 2, they allow and unlock creative freedom so that every single person who touches something is able to contribute to that end product in their own way. And 3, they rein in that chaos, they connect the dots between the big picture story and the individual creativity of each of those people through their feedback. So let's start with storytelling. I think there was a workshop yesterday about storytelling. When I first started in product management, I remember thinking to myself, I am not a great storyteller. And the reason was because what I thought of as a great storyteller was people like Andrew Stanton, the director of Finding Nemo, and of WALL-E, and he is a master storyteller. I want to play a quick clip of him pitching a part of Finding Nemo.
And he's woken up by his 6-year-old son, Nemo, who's now got a withered fin. It's from the accident with the barracuda, and he swims really erratically and strangely. But today he's ping-ponging all over the place because today's the first day of school. And he's all psyched, and this is the day that he's been waiting for, and this is the day that Father's been dreading. Because his untrust, his lack of trust, his fear of the ocean, everything is just coming to the surface. Because Nemo has Mr. Ray, who's the science eccentric stingray teacher who likes to bring all the kids out on a field trip to the reef on the first day of school.
So, what stands out about Andrew's pitch? Anything in particular? Enthusiasm, excitement. He gives you just enough detail so that you can paint a picture of what's happening in your mind. I imagine almost all of you have seen the film or imagining that first scene of Nemo bouncing around, what it's about. He gives just enough of detail to let you see something, but it's still so vague. He hasn't told you exactly what happens frame by frame, what it's going to be. He brilliantly also brings you along on the central conflict of the film, the anxiety of a father versus the adventurous spirit of his son, and he brings you along with that. So if you want teams to bring their best every day, if you want people to know, to understand what it takes to make great decisions, you have to pitch your product story with emotion, with confidence, with energy, like Andrew does. And user stories don't fucking count. They're not stories, right? They're just called stories. When was the last time you read a user story or a product brief that actually tried to convince you? When was the last time you heard a pitch that moved a team to action? That in my experience, most PMs believe that logic alone can make the case for what their product is. We've validated this, we've thought about that, we have this proof, we have this experiment. But people can be convinced by logic, but they're almost never moved by it. Logic is necessary, but it's not sufficient to motivate creative people to act. So here's a silly example from a growth team that I have helped run in the past. This is kind of a rough example. On the left side is just that, on one side is improve activation rate by 7%. Logically, that's the story, that's what we're trying to do, that's the business impact this team is responsible for. But what are you actually trying to do? And I don't think this is a great story, I whipped it up in a few minutes, but our mission is to help every customer discover how Slack can improve their work within the first day. You can go back to your office and practice this today. You don't have to be as good as Andrew Stanton to help your teams connect with the product story. Which of these is more likely to motivate someone, to have lasting impact, to hold in someone's mind so that they know what decisions to make as they're working through hard things? It's not as exciting as the opening scene of Finding Nemo, but it's at least a step in the right direction. Lesson number 2 is about creative freedom. So here's a quote from Ed Catmull. Creativity must be present at every level of every artistic and technical part of the organization. And they lived and breathed this. We lived and breathed this at Pixar. So ask yourself, do you get great ideas from every single member of your team every single day? Do your teams have enough independence to act on those ideas as they come? Or are they confined to your quarterly brainstorms where you bring people in a room and stick them up on a board and then throw them away and never do anything with it again? So how do you actually do this? So what can you actually do on your teams to beyond just hiring smart people, which is obviously a precondition to this, to doing this kind of work? So let's work with an example. This is a thing called a color script. I think you probably know exactly what film this is just by looking at it. It's from The Incredibles. And this is designed to give the lighting team an understanding of the overall look and feel from the beginning to the end of the film, to set sort of the emotional journey through color. And what's so interesting about this to me is that it has specificity in the places that matter and is incredibly loose and open in the places that aren't what this is trying to solve. It's rough and loose everywhere else. It's sort of like chunky, it doesn't have a lot of detail, but these colors are exactly correct. They are exactly the colors, if you were to open that film up, that you would see there. As the bar for quality, craft, and business results rise as product leaders, our instincts drive us towards more specificity, to be more prescriptive. But the opposite is what I think you actually need to do. Overspecification isn't just a problem because it takes extra time, which is what we hear a lot in sort of like, product development methodologies. Don't overprescribe, things might change. But I don't think it's just about the change. It's also about stifling creativity. If you spec a product spec with every single detail of every single interaction, your designer doesn't have any room to add anything. And their natural human instinct will be to deliver what you asked for. If a designer tells an engineer exactly how everything should look and how every frame of an animation should work out, that front-end engineer isn't going to help find new solutions. They're not going to help find something new. They may be inclined to just tell you what the bid is going to cost and move forward. My main thought here is that you should get to the next hill. You should give just enough information in your specs, in your product store, in those user stories to help people get to the next most important hill that helps you move to the next step, and as little as possible for everything else. And then, last, we called this plussing at Pixar. You have to set the expectation that once you touch something, it better leave your hands better than you found it. Not just to do your own work, but to add something creative to do some great work on top of it. Because this is what can lead you in unexpected and wonderful directions on these products. These films aren't imagined by directors as looking this way. They're built by every single person along the way. So, at this point, you might be thinking like, okay, that all sounds really good and highbrow and exciting. I should tell a great story, I'll loosen up a bit, I won't write such detailed specs, I'll let my teams figure things out. But that sounds a lot like chaos, right? Like, how is anything actually gonna get done? How do you keep a bunch of smart, motivated, intense, creative people pointed in the right direction? And this one seems obvious, but the answer is with feedback. That this is the primary role of a film director, and I think it's one of the primary roles of a product manager. So a couple of rules that I've defined for myself based on that experience. The first one is really hard. Review before it's ready. I think a lot, especially early career people, really want to hold on to things until they look great. And I think this is a huge mistake because it raises the cost of the work, but it also raises the cost of the feedback. If I give you feedback on something that you've taken to a 90%, I'm going to be disinclined to roll back, to rethink first principles, because it's going to take more time, it's going to take more work, it's going to get in the way. So you have to get things in front of people early and often. And for that, I think the second piece is so important, frequency. I think one of the biggest mistakes that product teams do is they make feedback hard to get. You have to sign up for a product review with the head of design and the CPO. Oh, and the VP of engineering needs to be there too, so it can only be once every 2 weeks. Oh, and there's only 3 20-minute slots, so you don't have time to sign up. What does that do? It raises the friction in order to get feedback, so it makes it so important to you that you end up taking things to 9 out of 10, right? So you have to make it frequent. You have to be able to walk by. You need to be able to sign up easily. You need to be able to do things every single day and build a culture of feedback into your teams. So think about how you could use your stand-up instead of just to review status, but also to review work as soon as possible. See what it looks like every day. The next is giving feedback holistically and at the right Zoom level. I think that actually a great example of where we go wrong on this is tools like Google Docs, which encourage you to give feedback on individual sentences instead of the structure of the document, the theme of it, the importance of it. How do you do that inside of a comment in Google Doc? You don't. Our tools are sort of encouraging us to give nitpicky, detailed feedback instead of holistic feedback at the correct Zoom level that pushes people in the right direction and leaves their creative freedom. So the last one is reviewing in public. I think this one's the hardest for a lot of teams, especially as companies get bigger, because you're inclined to say, like, I don't want to give hard feedback to this junior designer and PM in a room where there's lots of other people around. They're going to feel embarrassed. They're going to feel hurt. But what you do when you do that is you take away the gift of that feedback from everyone else in the room, from all the other people who also need to make those decisions, who have to get into your head and understand what you're thinking about how you're connecting the dots. And that's a super important thing. At Pixar, most reviews are open door, or at least at the time I was there. Anybody on the team could join them here, and it helped you solve problems in the future. So these are the lessons that I've held with me from Pixar. They've helped me personally become a much better product leader. From Andrew, I learned how to tell a great story that teams can align around. From Ed Catmull, I learned how to unlock creative freedom through looser specification, the expectation that everybody can contribute to that end product. And finally, we lived it, we breathed it in a continuous feedback process that helped connect the dots between the stories that we were telling and the individual creativity of every single person on the team. So I started off the talk with McCallum. He's often considered, the godfather of modern management. And because I wanted to think about this word, right? Manager. What does it mean to manage a product? Along those same lines, I think we've made this joke a bunch of times today, people often call a product manager CEO of the product. But you don't control any resources. You probably don't have any direct reports. And unlike McCallum, you actually need variance. You need creativity. You need changes of plans from your team in order to adapt to this environment. Unlike most CEOs, you can actually be fired if you screw this up. But you're still responsible for the output of the team, right? Just like a film director. So I want to leave you with this thought. Great product leaders are not managers. It's only a part of the job. Great product leaders should be directors. So good luck on all the product stories that you help bring to life, and thank you for listening.